Okay, so what do we have here? We have a 96 Ford Ranger with a V6 Vulcan engine, and recently we needed a new radiator because of radiator fluid getting into the transmission line, which means the radiator transmission cooler had disintegrated. And it was an old vehicle, so we replaced it because it was an easy $100 part and it wasn't too hard of a job. But then about 1,000 miles later, what happens? We get a cylinder misfire, a number 2 misfiring cylinder, and we have contaminated coolant, discolored coolant. So the green coolant started to change to a little bit of a yellow and a little bit of a muddy color. And that is indicative of getting exhaust from the engine into the coolant, which means a head gasket leak. Now we did try some other things to rule those out. We switched the spark plugs from cylinder number 2, and we switched the wire. Didn't seem to fix the misfire. The misfire code came back. We also disconnected the wire to the fuel injector for cylinder number 2 while the engine was running to see if there was a difference. There was. The engine sounded worse, which indicates that the fuel injector was likely operating. At least it isn't dead. It rules out a dead fuel injector. But with the smell of the radiator fluid, the discoloration, the cylinder would tend not to misfire when the engine was cold. It would misfire more and worse as the engine got hotter. That's your surfaces changing shape as they heat, the hole like opening up. That's a very strong indicator of a head gasket cylinder leak into your radiator coolant. So the first thing we had to do to attempt repair, the vehicle's old to the point where we're not going to spend $1,000 on a head gasket job, is to buy a chemical called K-sealant for $15. And the way to apply K-sealant for this type of failure, where you have exhaust going into your radiator, is to first dump the radiator fluid, because the radiator fluid is contaminated and becomes acidic, and that's what corroded the transmission line cooler to begin with, likely, or finish it off at least. It was an old radiator, but definitely finish it off. So first we put a gallon of fresh radiator fluid in there, and then you pour the K-seal in. Now to make the K-seal work, it's exhaust going into the radiator, not radiator fluid going into the exhaust, which means that you need to plug the hole by letting the sealant get into the engine a little bit. And the way to do that is to pull the spark plug, pull cylinder number 2 spark plug, disconnect it, and also remember to disconnect the line to the fuel injector for number 2 so that the cylinder isn't flooded with fuel as you run the engine. Put your additive in, run the engine, get it up to operating temperature, let the fluid circulate for a good 30 minutes, turn the vehicle off, let it cool for an hour, repeat the process, and then put the spark plug back in and see if it made the seal happen. Now, if you notice here in the front, this vehicle with a 6-cylinder engine, it only has 3 ignition coils, which means that the ignition coils are wired in pairs. So if you're going to run the engine with a plug missing, you need to wire the plug back in. Otherwise, cylinder 4 will not fire when cylinder 2 plug is disconnected, okay? So what you do is you take the plug and you jam it into the wire, and then you take the base of the plug and you ground it. I grounded it against the alternator. You can see here. You'll see, when I go over to the vehicle, you will see cylinder number 2 wire with cylinder number 2 plug in it, zip tied to a hose touching the alternator so that the plug continues to sparking outside of the engine so that cylinder 4 continues to fire. Otherwise, you're going to get cylinder 4 flooded with fuel, and that could burn out your cat, the catalytic converter, when you're doing this. So, a quick little look at that. It got a little dark out, but you could definitely see that sparking going on there, and that sparking is spark plug number 2 plugged into the wire and just zip tied against the alternator for a ground. So that way we don't stress the ignition coils, and that way plug 4 fires correctly, and we don't have unburned fuel being dumped into the catalytic converter, which could burn out the cat. So this is the way to do it. This is the second time we're running it, so it's almost been 30 minutes. We're going to shut it off, let it cool a little bit, so that way we can put the plug back in, reconnect the wiring, reconnect the fuel injector, and then see if our cylinder misfire went away. So I'll keep you posted.